Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to untangle the centuries of history and complex geopolitics behind Taiwan's modern status. It's one of those topics that's literally always making global headlines, yet the actual foundations are frequently misunderstood. So let's just break it all down, step by step.
Okay, let's dive right in by starting with the most common, yet deeply complicated question people ask about the island. Is Taiwan a country? Well, depending on who you ask, whether that's a diplomat, a legal scholar, or just a citizen walking down the street in Taipei, you might get entirely different answers. To figure out why this seemingly simple question is so incredibly hard to answer, we first have to look at the practical reality on the ground.
Because honestly, if you look at how it operates day to day, Taiwan practically functions as a sovereign state. Think about it. If you visit, you're going to exchange your money into new Taiwan dollars, you'll go through border control where they literally stamp your passport, and you'll see a society operating under its own independent laws, courts, and a democratically elected government. And that establishes our central paradox for today. How does a place possessing all these standard institutions of an independent state lack normal diplomatic recognition for most of the world?
To solve this massive geopolitical puzzle, here's our roadmap. We're going to define the entities, explore the deep history, examine the post-war divide, track Taiwan's democratic transition, map out the geopolitical chessboard, and finally, decode the modern status quo.
All right, part 1, defining the entities and separating Taiwan, the RSC, and the PRC.
To really understand this, we've got to hit the reset button to strictly separate the distinct political entities that get constantly confused in the news. Historically, you had two rival governments that both claimed to legitimately represent the whole of China. On one side, the Republic of China, or ROC. This was actually founded back in 1912 on the mainland. But after losing a massive civil war, its government retreated to Taiwan in 1949 and set up operations in Taipei. On the flip side, you have the People's Republic of China, or PRC, which was founded in 1949 by the Chinese Communist Party, operating out of Beijing. Now, Taiwan's constitutional name to this day remains the Republic of China. So it wasn't originally a conflict between a government calling itself China and another calling itself Taiwan. It was actually a conflict between two rival governments, both claiming to be China.
And that brings us to an absolutely crucial anchor fact. Beijing claims sovereignty over the island, but the PRC has actually never administered Taiwan's elections, its military, or its borders. The PRC was established in 1949, and it simply has never exercised governmental authority over Taiwan. So the present separation isn't because Taiwan broke away from the PRC, it's because the ROC government survived on the island after losing the mainland.
Moving on to part 2, the deep history and centuries of shifting rulers. Before 1949, Taiwan was literally the ultimate geopolitical hot potato. It changed hands between colonial and imperial powers for centuries. Long before any sustained Chinese administration, Taiwan's story began with diverse indigenous Austronesian communities who lived there for thousands of years. But just look at how fast things shifted. In 1624, the Dutch set up a colonial base for trade. Then, in 1662, they got kicked out by a Ming dynasty loyalist named Zheng Chenggong who wanted to use Taiwan as a military base. By 1684, the Qing Empire took over, which kicked off over 2 centuries of imperial Chinese rule and brought a lot of migration from the mainland. But then, fast forward to 1895, the Qing lost a war and ceded Taiwan to Japan. Japan ruled it as a colony for 50 years, bringing infrastructure, sure, but also strict authoritarian control, until they finally surrendered at the end of World War II in 1945.
Which brings us to part 3, the post-war divide, the 1945 handover, and the Civil War.
The modern era really kicks off following Japan's defeat in 1945, when the Republic of China assumed control of Taiwan. Now, initially, the local Taiwanese population actually welcomed the end of Japanese colonial rule, hoping they'd finally get some political participation. But things went south pretty quickly due to economic mismanagement and massive cultural clashes with the incoming mainland officials. And then came the huge demographic shift. In 1949, after losing the Chinese Civil War to Mao Zedong's communist forces, roughly 1.2 million ROC soldiers, officials, professionals, and refugees retreated to the island. Practically overnight, Taiwan became the final stronghold for a defeated government that still claimed to legitimately rule all of China.
You combine the incoming mainland administration's suspicion of the local Taiwanese population with a very real existential military threat from the PRC across the strait, and well, it resulted in severe political repression. The government, led by the Kuomintang, or KMT, imposed a strict martial law that lasted from 1949 all the way to 1987. This era is known as the White Terror. tens of thousands of people were targeted for suspected communist activity, for supporting Taiwanese independence, or honestly just for criticizing the government. It was a defining trauma of modern Taiwanese history. Next up, Part 4. Taiwan's democratic transformation, from martial law to multi-party elections. So, despite surviving under a dictatorship for decades, Taiwan simultaneously experienced this crazy economic boom that fueled an unstoppable demand for political freedom. Thanks to land reform and export-oriented policies, Taiwan became an economic powerhouse, one of the famous Asian tigers. And the speed of its democratic transformation is just staggering. Martial law was finally lifted in 1987 after 38 years. By 1996, the island held its first direct presidential election. And get this, it was won by Lee Teng-hui, who was actually born in Taiwan during Japanese rule, not on the mainland. Then, in the year 2000, we saw the first peaceful transfer of power to the opposition Democratic Progressive Party, officially ending 5 decades of continuous KMT rule. Today, it's a vibrant democracy, and this freedom allowed citizens to openly explore their distinct history, fostering a unique Taiwanese identity that's increasingly separate from the mainland narrative, especially among younger generations.
Let's pivot to Part 5, the geopolitical chessboard, exploring international diplomacy and strategic tensions. While Taiwan was transforming domestically into a thriving democracy, its international standing got incredibly complicated. The turning point was 1971. For decades, the Republic of China in Taipei had actually held China's seat at the United Nations. But in 1971, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution recognizing the PRC in Beijing as the only legitimate representative of China, expelling Taipei's representatives. This created a contested diplomatic reality full of legal gymnastics. Just notice the subtle but massive difference in wording between these two stances. Beijing holds the One China principle, stating Taiwan is an inseparable part of China and the PRC is the sole legitimate government. Washington, on the other hand, follows the One China policy. The U.S. recognizes the PRC as the government of China, but legally maintains robust, unofficial relations with Taiwan, supplies it with defensive weapons, and purposefully avoids explicitly endorsing Beijing's claim of sovereignty over the island.
And that leads us to this fascinating concept, strategic ambiguity. This is the official framework of the United States. It's purposefully designed to maintain peace across the Taiwan Strait through sheer uncertainty. Think of it like a high-stakes tightrope walk. By not stating exactly what the U.S. military would do, it prevents Beijing from invading because they can't be absolutely sure America won't intervene. But simultaneously, it discourages Taipei from declaring formal, legal independence because they can't be certain America would defend them if they provoked a war.
Within Taiwan's own borders, this overarching geopolitical tension completely shapes domestic politics. These two dominant political parties represent the differing democratic approaches to handling the threat from Beijing. The modern KMT generally favors using the existing Republic of China constitutional framework and pursuing closer communication with Beijing to lower tensions. On the flip side, the DPP emphasizes Taiwan's distinct, separate identity, insists on democratic self-determination, and pushes back much harder against political pressure from the PRC. But it is important to point out that a central principle in mainstream Taiwanese politics, basically across the board, is that the island's future absolutely should not be determined by force.
Finally, Part 6. The modern status quo and why things stay the same.
Today, Taiwan is deeply vital to the world economy. They produce the vast majority of our most advanced semiconductors. Since it functions entirely independently, with its own tech industry, military, and elections, you might be asking yourself, why don't they just draft a new constitution and declare a brand new Republic of Taiwan?
Well, there are 3 pragmatic realities standing in the way of that. Step 1, many Taiwanese leaders argue there's simply no need to declare independence because the Republic of China is already a sovereign state. Step 2 is the severe danger of war. Beijing has explicitly stated it reserves the option to use military force if Taiwan makes a decisive move toward permanent legal separation. And Step 3, a formal declaration of a new state could trigger a massive global military and economic crisis without even guaranteeing that the international community would formally recognize them anyway. These realities explain exactly why leaders deliberately maintain an ambiguous arrangement known as the status quo.
This quote really just hits the nail on the head. Ultimately, Taiwan exists in a highly unique space. It's fiercely democratic, independently governed, and deeply vital to global technology. Yet, it's claimed by a government that has never actually ruled it, and it remains diplomatically constrained on the world stage, retaining the constitutional name of a state that was originally created on the mainland over a century ago. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. As generations shift and Taiwanese identity solidifies and as global strategic competition intensifies, is the status quo a permanent, peaceful solution, or is it merely a temporary pause in Taiwan's centuries-long historical journey? It's a profound question and for sure one without an easy answer. But you now have the factual foundation to understand whatever happens next. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.